The guide had been stealing my tips for years and forcing me to work overtime. Now he's paying for taxis for 40 tourists because I'm on my legally mandated rest. I work as a tourist bus driver. Our industry is heavily regulated by the state, and rightly so. We transport the most valuable thing you have: your family, your children, your loved ones. What if I fall asleep at the wheel and crash into your car? You'd have to deal with the consequences. One of the work rules states, after a workday, there must be a minimum period of full, uninterrupted rest. By law, this rest can be reduced, but only 3 times during a work period, between 2 weekly rest periods, roughly speaking, between weekends. Another interesting rule: if my rest is interrupted, it's considered invalid and must start over, as if I hadn't rested at all. This will become important later. It sounds complicated, but in practice, I can rest for 9 hours only 3 times a week. All other times, it's a minimum of 11 hours. If my rest lasts less than 11 hours, it's counted as a 9-hour rest, even if it was 10 hours and 59 minutes. That's why most tour companies schedule at least 11 hours of rest and use reduced rest only in extreme cases. For example, if we're delayed and arrive late, but still need to depart on schedule the next day. We were working with a tour company, let's call it Mega Cheap Tours. Their guides tried to squeeze every last drop out of the drivers, excursions all day in some godforsaken place, just so they could pocket something extra. Then a trip to the hotel, a transfer to dinner, and back again, all of which didn't match the stated itinerary. Good companies usually have dinner near the hotel or at the hotel itself so the driver can rest. But for these guys, it's all about saving money, even if it means driving an hour each way in the evening. They don't care about the driver. We're paid for, after all. Why does this happen? Because the guide gets a kickback if the group eats at his favorite spot, and he has one in every city. I talked to our dispatcher saying they were ignoring the schedule, and he told me, do what they say. They're the clients. I was working with one guide. Let's call him Van. He was notorious for running drivers into the ground and cheating them out of tips. He'd collect tips from passengers on the last day of the tour for the driver, but pocket most of it himself. It was the last day of the tour, and tomorrow I was finally supposed to take them all to the airport. Thank God, I thought. While the tourists were on an excursion, Van came up to the bus. Tonight, we need to go here for dinner, he said, handing me an address. I punched it into the GPS. It was an hour and 15 minutes from our hotel. You'll eat for 2 hours, then another hour and 15 minutes back. Then I need to park the bus. I won't be done before 11 p.m., I said. He looked at me and said, I know the rules. You only need 9 hours of rest. We're leaving for the airport at 8 a.m. That's plenty of time. The flight's at 2 p.m., international. And he was technically right, but remember that rule. Only 3 times a week. He'd already made me cut my rest short 3 times on this trip, not to 9 hours, but to just over 10. This guy always pushed to the absolute limit. At that moment, malicious compliance kicked in. You're right, I can work after 9 hours of rest, I said, quickly changing the subject. He smirked, thinking he'd won. The dinner was worse than I expected. There was a terrible traffic jam on the way. I got delayed. They started eating later, and so we finished later and got back to the hotel later. When I parked the bus at the hotel, it was almost midnight. I knew what was coming in the morning and called our 24/7 dispatch. As expected, they told me sternly, under no circumstances break the law and drive without proper rest. The fines are huge, for the company and for me personally. Normally, when I have reduced rest, I set 2 alarms. Honestly, fatigue takes its toll, and it's hard to wake up without them. But that night, I didn't set any alarms and took the phone in my room off the hook. I went to bed and woke up to a knock on the door. It was the hotel administrator in a very angry van. You dumb driver, it's 8 a.m. Everyone's outside, checked out with their luggage, and you overslept. Get dressed and get behind the wheel, damn it. I smiled. Van, I'm on my legally mandated rest. We got back almost at midnight, so I can't start before 9 a.m. And besides, I've already worked after reduced rest 3 times on this trip, so now I'm not allowed to drive until I've had 11 hours of uninterrupted rest. Plus, you just interrupted my rest, as this gentleman can confirm. I was on good terms with the hotel staff. We always stayed at the same places, and they hated Van because he never left tips. Well, the guests left tips, but he collected them all for himself. So, by law, my rest starts over. You know the rules, right? See you at 7 p.m. I can do a late checkout, right? I asked the administrator, who nodded enthusiastically, realizing what I'd just pulled. Van's eyes nearly popped out of his head, and it was hilarious. What do you mean? We need to catch a 2 p.m. flight, he said. I know, I replied. Better start looking for taxis for those 40 people outside, and next time, don't screw over the driver. I closed the door in their faces. I knew what would happen next. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. It was dispatch. What time did you finish work yesterday? Then he said, Can you start at 9 a.m.? I reminded him about the 3 reduced rests. Silence. Then, well, you're right, of course. But don't expect to work with this company again. They'll ask us not to send you anymore. I asked if he wanted me to drive without proper rest, knowing he wouldn't dare say yes, especially since I could be recording. No, you don't have to follow rest regulations. It's the guide's fault. If he'd stuck to the schedule, everything would have been fine. Just do us a favor and start at 11 a.m., not 7 p.m. We need the bus back today. I knew when to stop pushing and said I'd happily start work at 11 a.m. I'll start getting ready now and go have breakfast. An hour later, I went down to the restaurant and saw Van surrounded by furious tourists yelling at him while he was on the phone. When he saw me, he came over. Mr. Driver, please. Neither I nor my company can find a bus to rent to the airport, 64 kilometers away. And our flight is in 4 hours. The company is furious that I didn't give you legal rest and is blaming me. Help, please. I couldn't resist. Van, if you use all those tips you've been stealing from me and every other driver all these years, you could easily pay for 10 taxis and make the flight. But I'd hurry, or you'll be stuck with 40 replacement plane tickets plus a taxi bill. Van swallowed hard, his eyes bulged, and he turned pale. It was funny. He rushed to the reception to order 10 taxis. The funniest part was when the taxis arrived, and the driver said they'd need 4 or 5 more just for the luggage. Everyone had 2 huge suitcases. I just sat there watching the show through the window, eating breakfast and drinking coffee. The hotel staff watched from different spots and smiled. For them, I was a hero. I knew that after this, no tips from tourists would ever go to Van again, and the taxi bill would seriously dent his ill-gotten savings. At least I hoped so. My boss was right. I never worked with that company again and didn't want to. Word quickly got around that they didn't want me back. But Van never led tours for that company again either. A former colleague told me that now all guides are strictly instructed to never give drivers less than 11 hours of rest every night. This must be factored in even for dinner transfers. If they don't fit, there's no transfer, and no deviations from the route, period. Edited. In the comments, people wrote that I set Van up and it was dirty. But I think he set himself up with his greed for kickbacks. By the schedule, the day was supposed to end at 9 p.m., and he always did this. He was supposed to keep track of my work hours no less than I did to keep the tour legal. Yes, I could have said in advance that I needed 11 hours of rest, but sometimes you just get fed up and do what you're told. As for the potential harm to passengers, like missing their flight, this all happened at 8 a.m., 6 hours before the flight. If he'd ordered taxis right away, which is exactly what I was aiming for, to make him pay for it himself, and he had the money and the means, they would have gotten to the airport faster than the bus. I was shocked when I went downstairs and saw the tourists still hadn't left. Even if they missed the flight, I'm sure the tour company would have rebooked everyone on the next flight and then blamed me. Also, many got confused about the interrupted rest, asking why I didn't drive at 7 p.m. By the letter of the law, I could have done that, and if Van had pushed, I probably would have. But I'm brave, not stupid. When the person paying your salary asks you to do a favor and start at 11 a.m. after the first legal rest period, I start at 11 a.m.